The sweltering Missouri sun beat down mercilessly as Catherine Calloway stepped off the stagecoach, her vision blurring at the edges. Her trembling fingers clutched a crumpled letter, the promise of a new life with a man she'd never met, as the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift like quicksand. Catherine had traveled for weeks to reach Nevada, Missouri, leaving behind a destitute existence in Boston after her father's passing left her with nothing but debts and desperate choices. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like divine providence. Hardworking rancher seeks respectable woman for matrimony. Passage paid. Now, as the July heat of 1876 wrapped around her like a suffocating blanket, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. "Town's that way, miss," the stagecoach driver called, gesturing vaguely down a dusty road that stretched between scattered buildings and beyond to rolling hills. "Your intended meetin' you here." "I'm to find my way to the Quinn Ranch," Catherine replied, her voice already parched from the dry air. She adjusted her heavy traveling dress, cursing its fashionable Boston thickness. "I was told it's not far from town," the driver snorted. "Not far by horse, maybe. That's a good 5 miles on foot and in this heat." He shook his head, tossing her carpetbag down from the coach. "Best wait till evening, miss." But Catherine couldn't bear the thought of delaying. What if her intended husband, Kyle Quinn, came looking for her, only to think she'd changed her mind? The humiliation of returning to Boston was unthinkable. She'd already sold everything she owned to supplement the ticket he'd provided, believing his promises of a comfortable home and respectable life. "I'll manage," she said with more conviction than she felt, straightening her back and gathering her belongings. Her reticule contained the last of her money, barely enough for a meal, and the letter with directions to the Quinn Ranch. The driver tipped his hat. "Suit yourself. Good luck to you." With a crack of his whip, the stagecoach rumbled away, leaving Catherine alone in a cloud of dust. She stood for a moment, gathering her bearings. Nevada was smaller than she'd imagined, just a few main streets with wooden buildings lining either side. A general store, a saloon, a small church, and what appeared to be a sheriff's office made up the heart of the town. People moved about their business, a few casting curious glances her way. Catherine swallowed hard, adjusted her hat to shield her face from the sun, and began walking in the direction the driver had indicated. Her shoes, practical by Boston standards, were wholly inadequate for the dusty trail. With each step, fine dust worked its way inside, rubbing against her stockings. After 30 minutes, the buildings of Nevada had fallen away behind her. The road stretched ahead, bordered by tall prairie grasses and the occasional tree. Catherine's throat ached with thirst, and she regretted not stopping to purchase water before leaving town. Her carpetbag grew heavier with each step, and she found herself switching it from hand to hand, wincing at the blisters forming on her palms. The sun climbed higher, seeming to focus its intensity directly upon her. Catherine had never experienced such heat, not the humid summers of Boston, but this dry, relentless burning that sucked moisture from her very pores. Her dress clung to her back, damp with perspiration, and her corset felt like an instrument of torture, constricting her breathing. 2 hours into her journey, Catherine's steps had slowed considerably. The horizon wavered before her eyes, and strange dark spots danced in her vision. She paused, setting down her bag to catch her breath. Perhaps she should have waited in town after all. But how would Kyle Quinn have found her? What if he came looking, only to return home alone, thinking she had changed her mind? "I must continue," she whispered to herself, picking up her bag once more. "Just a little farther." But her body had other plans. The dizziness that had been threatening for the past hour suddenly overwhelmed her. Catherine stumbled, her knees buckling beneath her. She was vaguely aware of her bag falling, of her body pitching forward onto the dusty trail. Then darkness claimed her, merciful in its cool embrace. Miles away, Kyle Quinn was riding hard toward town. At 32, he was a man accustomed to solving problems through sheer determination and physical effort. His ranch, while not the largest in the county, was respectable, built by his own hands over the past decade. The one thing missing, he had decided last winter, was a wife. The advertisement he'd placed in Eastern newspapers had yielded several responses, but Catherine Calloway's letter had stood out. Her penmanship was elegant, her words thoughtful and direct. She had been forthright about her circumstances. The daughter of a professor who had died leaving debts, educated but without prospects in Boston. She sought not adventure but stability and promised to be a hard-working partner. Kyle had arranged for her passage, expecting her to arrive on today's stagecoach. He'd planned to meet her in town, but a broken fence and escaped cattle had delayed him. Now he rode with urgency, his stallion's hooves pounding the packed dirt trail, hoping she would understand the delay. The road stretched empty before him, baked hard by weeks without rain. Kyle pushed his hat back, wiping sweat from his brow. The summer heat was brutal, especially for someone unaccustomed to it. He hoped Miss Calloway had had the sense to wait in town, perhaps at the hotel, or his thoughts broke off as he spotted something on the trail ahead. A splash of blue fabric against the brown dust. A carpetbag lay nearby, its contents partially spilled. Whoa! Kyle pulled his horse up short, swinging down from the saddle before the animal had fully stopped. His heart pounded as he approached the still form lying in the dirt. It was a woman, face down in the trail, her clothes those of an Easterner entirely unsuitable for the Missouri summer. Dark hair had come loose from its pins, spilling across her shoulders. Miss, can you hear me?" Kyle knelt beside her, gently turning her over. Her face was flushed an alarming red, her skin hot to the touch. Her lips were parched and cracked, her breathing shallow. "Miss Calloway." He ventured, recognizing her from the small tintype photograph she'd enclosed with one of her letters. Even in this state, he could see she was the same woman. Delicate features, high cheekbones, and dark lashes now closed against her flushed cheeks. Kyle knew immediately what had happened. Heatstroke was common enough in these parts, especially among those not acclimated to the punishing Missouri summers. She needed shade, water, and cooling immediately. Gathering her unconscious form in his arms, Kyle looked around frantically. The nearest shelter was a copse of cottonwood trees about 100 yards off the trail, where a small creek still flowed despite the summer heat. He whistled for his horse, which obediently trotted closer. "You'll be all right, Miss Calloway," he murmured, though he knew she couldn't hear him. With careful movements, he lifted her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, supporting her limp body against his chest. He retrieved her carpetbag, securing it to his saddle before guiding his horse toward the trees. The shade beneath the cottonwoods offered immediate relief from the punishing sun. Kyle dismounted, cradling Catherine carefully as he laid her in the soft grass beside the creek. Working quickly, he dipped his bandana in the cool water, wringing it out before placing it on her forehead. He loosened the high collar of her dress, giving her throat more room to breathe, but propriety prevented him from doing more. "Miss Calloway, Catherine," he called gently, patting her cheek. "Can you hear me?" She remained unconscious, her breathing shallow. Kyle continued to bathe her face and wrists with cool water, all the while speaking softly, reassuringly. He had seen heatstroke before and knew the danger it posed. Some never woke, their bodies overwhelmed by the sun's merciless assault. "You're going to be fine," he promised, though fear coiled in his stomach. "Just rest now. I've got you." As minutes stretched into an hour, Kyle maintained his vigil. He'd unsaddled his horse, allowing the animal to graze and drink nearby. He'd fashioned a more comfortable pillow for Catherine from his rolled-up jacket and continued to cool her with creek water. Her breathing had steadied somewhat, but she showed no signs of waking. Kyle studied her face, noticing details he couldn't see in the small photograph she'd sent. A tiny scar near her right eyebrow, the gentle curve of her lips, long eyelashes that cast shadows on her cheeks. He'd spent months exchanging letters with this woman, learning about her life in Boston, her hopes for a future in Missouri. Yet seeing her in person, even in this dire state, made those letters seem like pale shadows of the real woman. Should have met that stage, he muttered to himself, guilt gnawing at him. Should have known you'd try to walk it. As the afternoon wore on, Kyle grew increasingly concerned. If Catherine didn't wake soon, he would need to get her to a doctor. But the nearest physician was back in Nevada, and moving her might do more harm than good. Just as he was contemplating his options, Catherine stirred. A small moan escaped her lips, her head turning slightly on the makeshift pillow. "Miss Calloway," Kyle leaned closer, hope surging in his chest. "Catherine, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, then opened slowly, revealing eyes of deep brown, confusion clouding them as they struggled to focus on his face. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper, cracked and dry. "Easy now," Kyle said softly, reaching for his canteen. "You're safe. You collapsed on the trail." "Heat stroke, I reckon." He supported her head, helping her take small sips of water. "Not too much at once," he cautioned. "Small sips." Catherine obeyed, her gaze never leaving his face. After a few moments, recognition dawned in her eyes. "Mr. Quinn." Kyle nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Kyle Quinn, at your service. Though I must apologize for the circumstances of our meeting. I should have been waiting for you in town." Catherine tried to sit up but immediately fell back, dizziness overwhelming her. "I thought I would walk to your ranch," she managed. "The stagecoach driver said it wasn't far." 5 miles isn't far on horseback," Kyle said, shaking his head. "But on foot in this heat, wearing Eastern clothes. It was dangerous, Miss Calloway." Shame colored her already flushed face. "I didn't want you to think I hadn't come." The simple admission touched something in Kyle's chest. This woman had risked her health, perhaps her life, walking through the Missouri summer heat rather than risk disappointing a man she'd never met. "I would have found you," he said gently. "I was on my way to town when I saw you on the trail." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, whether from embarrassment or relief he couldn't tell. She blinked them away quickly. "How long have I been?" "About 2 hours since I found you," Kyle replied. "It's nearly 4 o'clock now." She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "I feel so foolish." "Not foolish," Kyle corrected. "Just unfamiliar with our climate. The heat here is different from what you're used to in Boston." Catherine managed a weak smile. "You remembered." "Of course," Kyle said simply. "I remember everything you wrote." A comfortable silence fell between them as Catherine took a few more sips of water. Kyle continued to dampen his bandana and place it on her forehead, noticing with relief that her skin no longer burned with the same intensity. "Mr. Quinn," Catherine said after a while, her voice stronger. "I feel I must address the situation directly. You arranged for a mail-order bride, and I have arrived in a most undignified state. If you wish to reconsider our arrangement, I would understand." Kyle stared at her, genuinely surprised by the suggestion. "Reconsider because you suffered heat stroke? That hardly seems fair." "Nevertheless," she persisted, "first impressions are important, and I fear mine has been less than impressive." A slow smile spread across Kyle's face. "Miss Calloway, I'd say surviving heat stroke is quite impressive indeed. Shows fortitude." Catherine's eyes widened slightly, then her lips curved into a tentative smile. "You're very kind, Mr. Quinn." "Not kind," he countered. "Just truthful, and please call me Kyle. If we're to be married, formality seems unnecessary." The mention of their impending marriage brought a flush to Catherine's cheeks that had nothing to do with the heat. "Kyle, then," she said softly. "And I'm Catherine." Kyle nodded, feeling oddly pleased at the sound of his name on her lips. "How are you feeling now, Catherine? Any better?" "Somewhat," she admitted. "Still weak and my head aches terribly, but the world has stopped spinning at least." "That's progress," Kyle said encouragingly. "We'll stay here a while longer, let you regain your strength. Then, if you feel up to it, we can ride to the ranch together. It's not far on horseback." Catherine's gaze flicked to his horse grazing nearby, and a flash of uncertainty crossed her face. "I haven't ridden much," she confessed. "You'll ride with me," Kyle assured her. "I won't let you fall." As the afternoon shadows lengthened, they talked quietly. Kyle told her about his ranch, the modest house he'd built with his own hands, the small herd of cattle he raised, the vegetable garden that needed tending. Catherine spoke of her journey from Boston, the people she'd met on the stagecoach, and her first impressions of the West. "It's beautiful," she said, looking at the dappled sunlight filtering through the cottonwood leaves. "Different from anything I imagined, but beautiful nonetheless." "Wait till you see the sunset over the hills," Kyle replied. "Like the sky's on fire, but in the best possible way." By early evening, Catherine felt strong enough to sit up properly, though moving too quickly still made her dizzy. Kyle had gathered her scattered belongings, repacking her carpetbag neatly. He'd also fashioned a sunbonnet of sorts from his spare shirt, insisting she wear it for the ride to the ranch. "Ready to try standing?" he asked, offering his hand. Catherine nodded, placing her smaller hand in his. Kyle's calloused palm enveloped hers, strong and steady as he helped her to her feet. She swayed slightly, and his other hand immediately went to her waist, stabilizing her. "I've got you," he murmured, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Take your time." Catherine looked up into his face, seeing it clearly for the first time. Kyle Quinn was not what she'd expected from their correspondence. His letters had been straightforward, sometimes even blunt, giving the impression of a practical, no-nonsense man. The man before her had those qualities. Certainly she could see it in the determined set of his jaw and the directness of his gaze. But there was gentleness, too, evident in the way he supported her, in the careful attention he'd paid to her comfort. His face was weathered from years working outdoors, lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting he smiled more than his serious expression indicated. His hair was dark brown, slightly too long and curling at the edges of his hat, and his eyes were a striking blue that reminded Catherine of the deeper parts of Boston Harbor. "Thank you," she said softly, aware that she was staring but unable to look away. "For finding me, for staying." Something shifted in Kyle's expression, a softening around his eyes, a subtle relaxation of his mouth. "I couldn't have done anything else," he replied, his voice low. For a moment they stood there, hands clasped, eyes locked, the space between them charged with something neither could name. Then Catherine's legs trembled with fatigue, breaking the spell. Kyle's grip tightened, supporting her. "Perhaps we should get you to the ranch," he said, clearing his throat. "You need proper rest and food." Catherine nodded, grateful for his steady presence as she took a few experimental steps. Her legs felt like rubber, but Kyle's hand at her elbow kept her upright. When they reached his horse, she eyed the animal with trepidation. "I'll lift you up first," Kyle explained. "Then mount behind you. That way I can make sure you don't fall." Before Catherine could respond, he had placed his hands at her waist and lifted her effortlessly onto the saddle. She gasped softly at the sudden movement, clutching the saddle horn for balance. A moment later, Kyle swung up behind her, his chest warm against her back, his arms reaching around her to take the reins. "Comfortable?" he asked, his breath tickling her ear. Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice. The intimacy of their position was both alarming and oddly comforting. She had never been this close to a man before, yet there was nothing improper in Kyle's manner. His presence was protective rather than presumptuous. They set off at a gentle walk, the horse picking its way carefully back to the trail. Catherine gradually relaxed, allowing herself to lean slightly against Kyle's solid frame when dizziness threatened. The makeshift sunbonnet kept the evening sun from her face, and the slight breeze created by their movement cooled her heated skin. "Tell me about your ranch," Catherine requested, partly to distract herself from her physical discomfort, partly from genuine curiosity. Kyle's voice rumbled against her back as he described the property: 160 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it, a modest two-room house he'd built himself with help from neighbors, a barn for the livestock, and plans for expansion once he had help. "It's not fancy," he admitted, "but the land's good. The house is solid, keeps out the rain and the cold. I've been adding to it bit by bit. Put in glass windows last winter, built a proper porch this spring." "It sounds wonderful," Catherine said sincerely. After months in a cramped Boston boarding house, any home of her own seemed like luxury. "I hope you'll find it agreeable," Kyle said, a note of uncertainty creeping into his voice. "It's a far cry from city living." Catherine thought of the boarding house where she'd lived after selling her father's home to pay his debts, the shared kitchen, the cramped bedroom, the constant noise and lack of privacy. "I think I might prefer country living, actually," she confessed. "The city can be suffocating." They crested a gentle hill, and Kyle drew the horse to a halt. "There it is," he said, pointing ahead. "Quinn Ranch." In the golden evening light, Catherine could see a small house nestled against a backdrop of trees. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney, and a split-rail fence enclosed what appeared to be a vegetable garden. Beyond the house stood a barn and corral where several horses grazed. The setting sun bathed everything in a warm glow, just as Kyle had described. "It's beautiful," Catherine breathed, meaning it. The ranch wasn't grand or imposing, but it had a welcoming quality that tugged at something deep within her. Kyle's arms tightened slightly around her. "It's home," he said simply. Then, with a gentle nudge, he urged the horse forward again. As they approached the ranch, Catherine noticed a figure emerge from the barn, a young man who raised a hand in greeting. "That's Ethan," Kyle explained. "Works for me part-time. Good kid. Probably wondering why I've been gone so long." When they reached the yard, Kyle dismounted first, then reached up to help Catherine down. Her legs buckled slightly as her feet touched the ground, and Kyle's hands steadied her waist. "Easy now," he murmured. "We're home. Home." The words sent an unexpected wave of emotion through Catherine. After weeks of travel, after the disastrous walk from town, after collapsing on the trail, she was home. Ethan approached, a lanky youth of perhaps 17, eyeing Catherine with undisguised curiosity. "Everything all right, Mr. Quinn? You've been gone all day." "Had to rescue Miss Calloway here from the heat," Kyle explained, keeping one hand at Catherine's elbow for support. "Ethan, this is Miss Catherine Calloway from Boston. Catherine, this is Ethan Morris." Ethan touched his hat respectfully. "Pleased to meet you, madam. Welcome to Quinn Ranch." "Thank you, Ethan," Catherine replied, managing a smile despite her exhaustion. "Ethan, would you take care of Thunder?" Kyle asked, nodding toward his horse. "Miss Calloway needs to rest." "Sure thing, Mr. Quinn," Ethan said, taking the reins. He hesitated, then added, "Mrs. Thornton stopped by earlier, Left something for Miss Calloway on the porch. Kyle nodded. Thanks. We'll see to it. With Ethan leading the horse away, Kyle guided Catherine toward the house. The few steps to the porch seemed to drain what little energy she had left, and she leaned heavily on Kyle's arm. Almost there, he encouraged, supporting her up the 3 wooden steps to the porch. On a small table by the door sat a covered basket. Kyle lifted the cloth to reveal fresh bread, a jar of preserves, and what appeared to be a pot of stew. Martha Thornton, he explained with a smile. Nearest neighbor, about 2 miles that way, he gestured vaguely. Word travels fast around here. She must have heard I was expecting a bride. The casual way he referred to her as his bride sent a flutter through Catherine's stomach, a reminder of the arrangement that had brought her to Missouri. In the drama of her collapse and rescue, she'd almost forgotten the purpose of her journey. Kyle pushed open the door, revealing a simple but neat interior. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a solid table and chairs on one side, a comfortable-looking armchair and small sofa on the other, positioned near a stone fireplace. Braided rugs softened the wooden floor, and curtains clearly a feminine touch from some previous visitor hung at the windows. Bedroom's through there, Kyle said, nodding toward a door at the back of the room. It's yours now. I've been sleeping out here since I put in the second room last year. Oh, but I couldn't, Catherine began to protest. You can and you will, Kyle said firmly. Especially tonight. You need proper rest after what you've been through. Too exhausted to argue, Catherine allowed Kyle to lead her through to the bedroom. Like the main room, it was simple but comfortable, with a bed frame that Kyle had clearly crafted himself, a patchwork quilt in blues and greens, a small dresser, and a washstand. I'll bring your bag and some water, Kyle said, helping her to sit on the edge of the bed. Are you hungry? Martha's stew is the best in the county. Catherine's stomach growled in response, bringing a flush to her cheeks and a smile to Kyle's face. I'll take that as a yes, he said, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. Rest here. I'll be right back. Left alone, Catherine allowed herself to slump slightly, the full weight of the day's events crashing over her. She had nearly died on that dusty trail, if Kyle hadn't found her when he did. The thought sent a shiver through her despite the warmth of the room. What a strange twist of fate, that the very man she had traveled across the country to marry had been the one to save her life before they'd even properly met. Kyle returned with her carpetbag, setting it beside the dresser. I'll give you a few minutes to yourself, he said. Then I'll bring in some food and water for washing up. Thank you, Catherine said, the words wholly inadequate for what she felt. When the door closed behind him, she opened her bag, grateful to find a nightgown and fresh undergarments. With trembling fingers, she began to undo the buttons of her travel dress, wincing as the fabric peeled away from her sunburned skin. The simple act of changing clothes exhausted what little strength she had left, and she had just pulled the nightgown over her head when a knock came at the door. Catherine, may I come in? Yes, she called weakly, pulling the quilt up to cover her lap as she sat on the edge of the bed. Kyle entered, carrying a tray with a steaming bowl of stew, a slice of bread, and a glass of water. He'd also brought a basin of water and a clean cloth for washing. You should eat while it's hot, he said, placing the tray beside her on the bed. Then rest. Everything else can wait until tomorrow. Catherine's hands shook as she picked up the spoon. Kyle hesitated, then sat beside her, gently taking the utensil from her fingers. Let me, he said, his voice low. Under different circumstances, Catherine might have been mortified to be fed like a child. But as Kyle patiently offered her spoonful after spoonful of the rich stew, she could summon only gratitude. The food was delicious, warming her from the inside out, and Kyle's steady presence was oddly comforting. When she had eaten her fill, Kyle set the tray aside and handed her the glass of water. "Drink all of it," he instructed. "You're still dehydrated." Catherine obeyed, draining the glass. Already her eyelids were growing heavy, exhaustion pulling her towards sleep. Kyle seemed to notice, rising from the bed. "Rest now," he said softly. "We can talk more tomorrow." "Kyle," Catherine murmured, fighting to keep her eyes open. "Thank you for everything." He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she was too tired to interpret. "Sleep well, Catherine," he said, and then he was gone, closing the door quietly behind him. Catherine barely managed to set the empty glass on the bedside table before collapsing against the pillows. Despite the strangeness of her surroundings, despite the lingering discomfort of her sunburn and the residual dizziness from the heat stroke, sleep claimed her almost instantly. Outside in the main room, Kyle sat at his table, staring into a cup of coffee gone cold. The day had certainly not unfolded as he'd expected. When he'd placed that advertisement months ago, he'd been looking for a practical arrangement, companionship, help with the ranch, perhaps eventually children. Romance had hardly entered his calculations. Yet finding Catherine collapsed on that trail, caring for her beneath the cottonwoods, feeling her slim body pressed against his during the ride home, these things had awakened something in him he hadn't anticipated. A protectiveness, certainly, but something else too. Something that had made his heart race when she looked up at him with those expressive brown eyes. "Getting ahead of yourself, Quinn," he muttered, pushing the cold coffee away. He'd known the woman less than a day. Whatever he was feeling was likely just concern for her well-being, combined with the natural relief of having his mail-order bride finally arrive after months of correspondence. Still, as he made up his bed on the sofa, Kyle couldn't help glancing toward the bedroom door. Beyond it, Catherine slept the woman who had traveled across the country to marry a man she'd never met, who had nearly died trying to reach him, who now lay exhausted under his roof. Whatever happened next, Kyle knew one thing with certainty. His life had irrevocably changed the moment he'd spotted that splash of blue fabric on the dusty trail. Catherine woke to golden light filtering through cotton curtains, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory flooded back: the stagecoach, the blistering heat, collapsing on the trail, and Kyle Quinn's strong arms carrying her to safety. She sat up slowly, relieved to find the dizziness greatly diminished. Her skin still felt tight and uncomfortable from sunburn, and a dull headache lingered behind her eyes, but the desperate weakness of yesterday had abated. On the bedside table sat a pitcher of water and a clean glass that hadn't been there when she'd fallen asleep. Kyle must have slipped in quietly while she slept. The thought of him moving silently around the room while she was unconscious should have alarmed her, but instead, Catherine found it oddly touching. Everything about Kyle Quinn suggested a man of integrity, from his letters over the past months to his gentle care yesterday. After washing her face and hands with the water from the pitcher, Catherine dressed in the simplest of her dresses, a light cotton in pale blue that required minimal assistance with fastenings. Her hair was another matter entirely. Without her usual pins and combs, which had scattered when she fell, the best she could manage was a simple braid. Taking a deep breath, she opened the bedroom door and stepped into the main room of the ranch house. Kyle stood at the stove, his back to her as he tended to something in a cast iron skillet. He'd clearly been up for hours. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms tanned and muscled from outdoor work. "Good morning," Catherine said softly. Kyle turned quickly, surprise and something like relief washing over his features. "Catherine, you're awake." His eyes assessed her carefully. "How are you feeling?" Much better, thank you, she replied, moving toward the table. Still a bit weak, but the dizziness has mostly gone. Good. Kyle nodded, seemingly satisfied with her appearance. I was worried when you slept past noon. Past noon? Catherine glanced toward the window, alarmed. I had no idea it was so late. You needed the rest, Kyle said simply. He gestured toward the skillet. Hungry, I was just making some eggs. Starving, actually, Catherine admitted, settling into a chair at the table. But please don't go to any trouble on my account. Kyle gave her a look that was half amusement, half exasperation. Feeding you is hardly trouble. He deftly flipped the eggs onto 2 plates, adding slices of bread before bringing them to the table. Coffee, please, Catherine said, suddenly ravenous at the sight of food. Kyle poured coffee into 2 mugs, setting one before her along with cream and sugar. He watched with evident satisfaction as Catherine took a grateful sip. I should apologize, he said as he took his own seat across from her, for not meeting you in town yesterday. There was trouble with the herd broken fence, cattle scattered. By the time I got them rounded up and the fence fixed, the stage had already arrived. There's no need to apologize, Catherine assured him, touched by his concern. You couldn't have known I would be foolish enough to attempt the walk in that heat. Not foolish, Kyle corrected her, just as he had yesterday. Just unfamiliar with the territory, and determined, I suspect. Catherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks, perhaps a bit too determined. A comfortable silence fell between them as they ate. Catherine tried not to stare at Kyle, but she couldn't help stealing glances. In the clear light of day, she could see him more clearly than she had yesterday through her heat-blurred vision. His features were strong, straight nose, well-defined jaw with a day's growth of stubble, expressive mouth that seemed more inclined to firmness than smiles. Yet when he did smile, as he did now catching her glance, his entire face transformed. So, Kyle said, setting down his coffee mug. We should probably discuss our arrangement. Catherine's heart stuttered at the directness of his approach, though she shouldn't have been surprised. His letters had always been straightforward. Yes, of course, she said, setting down her fork. I imagine you have questions, now that we've met in person. Just one, really, Kyle said, his blue eyes intent on hers. After what happened yesterday and now that you've seen the ranch, do you still want to go through with it? Marrying me, I mean. The blunt question took Catherine aback. Yes, of course. Unless you've changed your mind, no, Kyle said quickly, almost too quickly. I haven't changed my mind, but I want to be certain you understand what you're agreeing to. This isn't Boston. Life here is hard sometimes. Simple. We're miles from town, from neighbors. Winters can be brutal, summers scorching, as you've already discovered. I understand, Catherine said. I didn't come here expecting luxury, Mr. Quinn. I came looking for a home, for stability, for a new beginning. Kyle's expression softened. We agreed on first names, remember? Catherine smiled. Kyle, then. My answer remains the same, he nodded slowly, as if coming to a decision. Then I suggest we head into town tomorrow if you're feeling up to it. We can see the preacher, make it official. Tomorrow, Catherine's heart raced at the immediacy of it. Unless you want to wait, Kyle asked, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. No, tomorrow is fine, Catherine said quickly. It's happening rather fast, isn't it? Kyle's mouth quirked in a half smile. Seems to me we've been headed toward this for months, ever since that first letter. He was right, of course. The entire purpose of their correspondence had been this arrangement, a marriage based on mutual need and respect, if not love. And yet, sitting across from this man who had saved her life, who had carried her to safety and watched over her through the night, Catherine felt a confusing tangle of emotions that went beyond their practical arrangement. Tomorrow, then, she agreed, offering a smile she hoped concealed her jumbled thoughts. Relief visibly washed over Kyle's features. "Good, that's good." He cleared his throat, standing and gathering their empty plates. "I need to check on the herd this afternoon. Will you be all right here alone?" "You should probably rest more." "I'll be fine," Catherine assured him. "Actually, I'd like to explore the house a bit if you don't mind. Get my bearings." "Of course," Kyle said. "It's your home now or will be officially tomorrow. Feel free to look around, make yourself comfortable." He carried the dishes to a basin of water near the stove, washing them with efficient movements that spoke of long practice. Catherine watched him, struck by the domesticity of the scene. This would be her life now, this house, this man, this daily routine so different from the one she'd known in Boston. "I won't be gone long," Kyle promised, drying his hands on a towel. "An hour or two at most. There's more of Martha's bread on the counter if you get hungry, and tea in the canister beside the stove." "I'll manage," Catherine said, touched by his concern. "Don't worry about me." Kyle paused, looking at her intently. "That might be difficult," he said softly. Then, as if embarrassed by the admission, he grabbed his hat from a peg by the door and hurried out. Catherine sat at the table for several minutes after he left, replaying his words in her mind. That might be difficult. Such a simple phrase, yet it hinted at feelings beyond the practical arrangement they'd agreed upon. Was it possible that Kyle Quinn was already developing genuine affection for her? Or was he simply being kind to a woman who had nearly died on her way to meet him? With a sigh, Catherine rose from the table, determined to make use of her solitude to better understand the home that would soon be hers. The main room was larger than it had first appeared, with the kitchen area occupying one end and a cozy sitting area at the other. Everything was simple but well made, much of it clearly crafted by Kyle's own hands. The furniture was solid, the floors swept clean, the windows letting in ample light. A bookshelf against one wall caught Catherine's attention. She approached it curiously, running her fingers along the spines of the volumes. The collection was modest but surprisingly varied, practical manuals on farming and animal husbandry alongside works of history, poetry, and fiction. Catherine smiled, recalling that Kyle had mentioned a fondness for reading in one of his letters, but seeing evidence of it touched her deeply. Moving on to the kitchen area, she opened cupboards and drawers, familiarizing herself with their contents. Everything was organized with practical efficiency, though certain feminine touches were noticeably absent. No decorative linens, no pretty china, just serviceable plates, cups, and cooking implements. The bedroom was much as she remembered from the previous night, though in daylight she could better appreciate the craftsmanship of the furniture. The bed frame was sturdy oak, hand-carved with a simple but elegant pattern. The dresser matched it, suggesting Kyle had made them as a set. Adjacent to the bedroom was a small room Catherine hadn't noticed before. Peering inside, she discovered a rudimentary washroom with a large copper tub, currently empty, and shelves holding towels and other bathing necessities. A small window provided light and ventilation. By the time she had completed her exploration, Catherine felt a growing appreciation for the home Kyle had built. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was solid, comfortable, and clearly maintained with care. She could easily imagine making it her own with a few feminine touches: curtains for the windows, quilts for the winter, perhaps flowers in the summer. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats in the yard. Glancing out the window, Catherine saw not Kyle returning but Ethan, the young man she'd briefly met yesterday. He dismounted near the barn, leading his horse inside. After a moment's hesitation, Catherine decided to greet him. Though still weak from her ordeal, she felt steady enough for the short walk to the barn. Smoothing her skirts and adjusting her braid, she stepped outside into the afternoon sunshine. The heat immediately enveloped her, though it seemed less oppressive than the previous day. Still, Catherine moved carefully, mindful of her recent collapse. The short distance to the barn left her slightly breathless, a reminder that she wasn't fully recovered. "Hello," she called, pausing in the barn doorway to let her eyes adjust to the dimmer light within. Ethan appeared from one of the stalls, surprise evident on his youthful face. "Miss Calloway, I didn't expect you to be up and about." "I'm feeling much better today," Catherine assured him with a smile, "though still a bit weak. I saw you ride in and thought I'd come say a proper hello since I wasn't at my best yesterday." Ethan removed his hat, running a hand through his sandy hair somewhat self-consciously. "Glad you're feeling better, madam. Mr. Quinn was mighty worried about you." "Was he?" The thought warmed Catherine unexpectedly. "Yes. Never seen him so concerned," Ethan confirmed, leading his horse to a water trough. "He came tearing into the yard yesterday with you in his arms, barking orders like a general. Had me running for water and clean cloths before I could even ask what happened." Catherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks at the image Ethan's words evoked. "He was very kind," she murmured. "Mr. Quinn's a good man," Ethan said with the conviction of someone stating an obvious truth. "Best I've ever worked for. Fair, honest, teaches me things, doesn't just order me around." He glanced at Catherine, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "Course, he's been a bear to work with these past few weeks, waiting for you to arrive." "Really?" Catherine couldn't hide her curiosity. Ethan grinned. "Yes, checking the mail every day, fixing up the house, making sure everything was just so. Never seen him so particular." The revelation sent a flutter through Catherine's stomach. She had imagined Kyle preparing for her arrival in a practical way, but Ethan's description suggested something more: anticipation, perhaps even nervousness. "I should let you get back to your work," Catherine said, suddenly eager to process this new information in private. "It was nice speaking with you, Ethan." "Likewise, Miss Calloway," Ethan replied, touching his hat respectfully. "And if you don't mind my saying so, I think you'll be good for Mr. Quinn. He's been alone too long." Catherine thanked him, making her way slowly back to the house. By the time she reached the porch, her strength was flagging, and she sank gratefully onto a wooden chair Kyle had positioned to catch the afternoon shade. Alone too long. Ethan's words echoed in her mind as she sat watching the gentle roll of the Missouri hills surrounding the ranch. Kyle had mentioned in his letters that he'd been on his own since coming west 10 years ago. At 32, he was 6 years her senior, and had clearly built a life for himself here, a good life, by all appearances. Yet he had advertised for a mail-order bride, seeking a partner to share that life. Catherine had responded to his advertisement out of necessity. Her options in Boston had been limited after her father's death left her nearly destitute. But why had Kyle, clearly capable and respected, felt the need to seek a wife from halfway across the country? The sound of hoofbeats interrupted her musing. Kyle appeared over the rise, riding at an easy trot. He straightened in the saddle when he spotted her on the porch, urging his horse to a slightly faster pace. "Catherine," he called as he approached, concern evident in his voice. "Should you be outside? The fresh air feels good," she assured him as he dismounted. "And I was careful, I promise." Kyle tied his horse to the rail and joined her on the porch, studying her face with those penetrating blue eyes. Apparently satisfied that she wasn't on the verge of collapse, he relaxed slightly, taking the chair beside hers. "How are you feeling, truthfully?" "Truthfully, tired, still a bit weak, and my skin feels like it's been roasted over a fire," Catherine admitted, "but vastly improved from yesterday." Kyle nodded, the worry in his expression easing somewhat, Good, you gave me quite a scare, you know. I'm sorry about that, Catherine said sincerely. It was foolish to attempt that walk in the heat. As I said before, not foolish, just unprepared. Kyle's gaze shifted to the horizon, where the afternoon sun was beginning its descent. This country can be harsh on those who don't respect its ways. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching the play of light and shadow across the rolling landscape. Catherine found herself acutely aware of Kyle's presence, beside her the subtle scent of leather and horses that clung to him, the rhythmic sound of his breathing, the way his calloused hands rested easily on the arms of his chair. "I met Ethan at the barn," Catherine said eventually. "He seems like a fine young man." "He is," Kyle agreed. "Hard worker, eager to learn. His father died 2 years ago, typhoid. His mother manages with the younger children, but Ethan needed work. He's been a godsend around here." "He speaks very highly of you," Catherine observed. A faint flush colored Kyle's tan cheeks. "Does he now?" he muttered, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "Well, he's a good kid." Catherine smiled, charmed by his modesty. "He mentioned you've been preparing for my arrival." Kyle's flush deepened. "Did he?" He said, sounding distinctly disgruntled, "Boy talks too much." "I thought it was sweet," Catherine said softly. Kyle glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression before he quickly looked away. "Just wanted to make sure everything was ready," he said gruffly. "Only proper." Another silence fell between them, though this one held a different quality, a tension that hadn't been there before. Catherine felt a strange fluttering in her stomach, a awareness that tomorrow she would marry this man who was still largely a stranger, yet who had already shown her more kindness than anyone since her father died. "Kyle," she said suddenly, turning to face him, "may I ask you something personal?" He looked at her warily but nodded. "Of course. Why did you advertise for a mail-order bride? You seem perfectly capable, respected in the community. Surely there are single women in Nevada or the surrounding area who would have been interested in marriage." The question clearly caught him off guard. Kyle was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the distant hills as if the answer lay somewhere on the horizon. "There are some widows, a few unmarried women in town," he finally acknowledged. "But—" he trailed off, seeming to search for words. "But," Catherine prompted gently. Kyle sighed, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "I've been on my own since I was 22. Came west with nothing but determination and a willingness to work hard. Built this place from nothing." Pride colored his voice, but there was something else too, a loneliness that resonated with Catherine's own. "The women here, they know me too well in some ways, not well enough in others," he continued. "They see the ranch, the cattle, a man who's established himself. They don't see—" He paused, clearly uncomfortable with bearing so much of himself. "What don't they see?" Catherine asked softly. Kyle met her eyes, and the vulnerability she saw there caught at her heart. "They don't see that I want more than just a practical arrangement. More than just someone to cook and clean and bear children." He looked away quickly, as if embarrassed by the admission. "I thought someone new, someone who didn't know all my faults and shortcomings, might be able to see me differently." The raw honesty of his answer left Catherine momentarily speechless. In their correspondence, Kyle had always been forthright about his expectations for their marriage companionship, help with the ranch, the possibility of children. But he had never hinted at this deeper longing for connection, for being truly seen. "I think I understand," Catherine said when she found her voice. "After my father died, people in Boston saw only what they expected to see: a spinster daughter left destitute, an object of pity or opportunity. No one really looked past that." Kyle nodded slowly, recognition dawning in his eyes. "That's it exactly. Sometimes you need a fresh start with someone who doesn't have you all figured out before you even begin." Their gazes held for a long moment, and Catherine felt something shift between them, a deepening of understanding, a recognition of something shared. Tomorrow they would marry, binding their lives together in the eyes of the law and the community. But in this quiet moment on the porch, with the sun dipping toward the hills and casting long shadows across the yard, Catherine felt they had already formed a bond more meaningful than any legal contract. "It's getting cool," Kyle said eventually, breaking the spell. "You should go inside before you catch a chill on top of the heat stroke." Catherine smiled at his concern. "I suppose you're right. Will you come in as well? I could make us some tea." A slow smile spread across Kyle's face, transforming his features. "I'd like that," he said simply. As they rose together, Kyle's hand came to her elbow, steadying her with a touch so gentle it almost brought tears to Catherine's eyes. This man, who had carried her unconscious from the trail and watched over her through the night, who had shared his vulnerability on the porch just now, this was the man she would marry tomorrow. For the first time since leaving Boston, Catherine felt not just resignation about her fate, but a flutter of something that might, with time and care, grow into happiness. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and bright, with a merciful breeze that tempered the July heat. Catherine stood at the bedroom window, watching the early light gild the rolling hills surrounding Quinn Ranch. Today she would become Catherine Quinn, wife of a man she barely knew yet felt increasingly drawn to. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Catherine." Kyle's voice was low, as if he wasn't sure she was awake. "Are you up?" "Yes, come in," she called, turning from the window. Kyle entered, already dressed in what was clearly his best shirt and trousers, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. He carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. "You look." He paused, his eyes taking in her appearance. Catherine had dressed in her finest gown, a pale green silk saved from her Boston days, with a modestly scooped neckline and three-quarter sleeves. She'd managed to arrange her hair in a more elaborate style than yesterday's simple braid, using the few pins she had recovered from her carpet bag. "Beautiful," Kyle finished, a touch of wonder in his voice. "You look beautiful, Catherine." Warmth bloomed in her cheeks at the simple compliment. "Thank you, you look quite handsome yourself." Now it was Kyle's turn to appear flustered. He cleared his throat, holding out the package. "I have something for you. A wedding gift, I suppose." Surprised, Catherine accepted the package, carefully untying the string that bound it. Inside lay a delicate silver chain with a small pendant, a simple design of intertwined leaves crafted in silver. "Oh, Kyle," Catherine breathed, lifting the necklace from its wrapping. "It's lovely." "It was my mother's," Kyle said, a touch of vulnerability in his voice. "One of the few things I brought west with me. I thought you might like to wear it today." The significance of the gift wasn't lost on Catherine. This wasn't a trinket purchased for the occasion, but a family heirloom, something precious that connected Kyle to his past. "I would be honored," she said softly, holding out the necklace. "Would you help me put it on?" Kyle took the delicate chain, his calloused fingers surprisingly deft as Catherine turned and lifted her hair. She felt his warm breath on her neck as he fastened the clasp, and a shiver ran through her that had nothing to do with the morning coolness. "There," he said, his voice oddly rough. "It suits you." Catherine turned to face him, one hand going to the pendant that now rested at the hollow of her throat. "Thank you, Kyle, not just for the necklace, but for everything, for saving my life on the trail, for your kindness since." Kyle's expression softened, his blue eyes warm as they held hers. "You don't need to thank me for that. Nevertheless, I am grateful." Catherine hesitated, then added, "I want you to know that I will try to be a good wife to you, Kyle. I know our arrangement began as a practical one, but I hope it can become something more." Something flickered in Kyle's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or hope. "I want that too," he admitted, his voice low. "More than I realized when I first placed that advertisement." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Kyle seemed to collect himself, stepping back slightly. "We should get going if we want to reach town before it gets too hot. The buggy's ready whenever you are." "I just need a few minutes," Catherine assured him. "I'll meet you outside." When Kyle had gone, Catherine stood for a moment, her fingers touching the silver pendant. This day was nothing like the wedding she had once imagined for herself. No church filled with flowers, no reception with dancing, no proud father to give her away. Just a simple ceremony in a frontier town, binding her to a man she was only beginning to know. Yet as she gathered her shawl and gloves, checking her appearance one final time in the small mirror above the dresser, Catherine felt not disappointment but a growing sense of rightness. Whatever lay ahead, she and Kyle would face it together, two people who had recognized in each other a chance for something genuine. The ride to town was pleasant, the buggy more comfortable than Catherine had expected. Kyle proved to be a skilled driver, handling the team with quiet confidence as they traveled the same road where Catherine had collapsed 2 days earlier. "Hard to believe I tried to walk this," she remarked as the miles rolled by. "It seemed so much longer on foot." "Everything seems longer when you're suffering," Kyle observed. "Though I have to admit, I'm grateful for your stubbornness. If you'd waited in town, we might have missed each other entirely." Catherine glanced at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" Kyle's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "I was headed to town by the back trail when I spotted you on the main road. If you'd stayed in Nevada, waiting at the hotel or somewhere, I wouldn't have found you until much later. Might not have made a good first impression, arriving hours late to collect my bride." The thought sent a chill through Catherine despite the warm morning. Such a small thing, her decision to walk. His choice of route had brought them together at precisely the right moment. Had she waited in town, or had Kyle taken the main road, their story might have unfolded very differently. "Perhaps it was fate," she said softly. Kyle's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Maybe so, or maybe just good luck." "Either way, I'm glad it happened as it did," Catherine admitted. "Even the heat stroke." Kyle shot her an incredulous look. "You can't mean that." "Well, perhaps not the heat stroke specifically," she amended with a smile. "But the rest of it, you finding me, caring for me, it allowed us to get to know each other in a way that might have taken weeks otherwise." Kyle considered this, nodding slowly. "I suppose that's true. Though I would have preferred a less dangerous introduction." Nevada came into view as they crested a hill, looking much as it had when Catherine had first arrived, though with her wits about her, she could better appreciate the frontier town's simple charm. The main street bustled with morning activity, shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks, farmers bringing goods to market, children running errands for their parents. Kyle guided the buggy to a hitching post outside a neat white building that Catherine recognized as the church she had glimpsed on her arrival. "Reverend Wallace should be expecting us," Kyle said, helping Catherine down from the buggy. "I sent word with Ethan yesterday." Sure enough, the church door opened as they approached, and a tall, thin man in a black coat emerged, smiling warmly. "Mr. Quinn, and this must be Miss Calloway. Welcome, welcome." "Reverend Wallace," Kyle greeted him with a handshake. "Thank you for accommodating us on such short notice." "Not at all, not at all," the Reverend assured them, ushering them inside. "Always happy to join two souls in holy matrimony. Mrs. Wallace has prepared a small bouquet for the bride, and we have witnesses ready." Mrs. Thornton insisted on being present when she heard the news. Inside the simple church, Catherine was greeted by a plump, cheerful woman who must be Martha Thornton, the neighbor who had left food at the ranch. Beside her stood a dignified older man introduced as her husband, James. "Oh, my dear, I'm so glad to meet you properly, Mrs. Thornton exclaimed, clasping Catherine's hands in her own. "When Kyle told us he was expecting a bride from back east, I was so excited for him. And then to hear about your ordeal on the trail. Thank goodness he found you when he did." "Yes, I was very fortunate," Catherine agreed, touched by the woman's genuine warmth. "Well, you're here now and about to become Mrs. Quinn," Mrs. Thornton said with satisfaction. "Kyle's a fine man, the best neighbor we could ask for. You've chosen well." Before Catherine could explain that the choice had been born more of necessity than careful selection, Mrs. Wallace appeared with a small bouquet of wildflowers tied with a ribbon. "For you, my dear," she said, pressing it into Catherine's hands. "Every bride should have flowers on her wedding day." The simple kindness brought unexpected tears to Catherine's eyes. "Thank you," she managed, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of these strangers who were welcoming her so warmly. Kyle appeared at her side, concern in his eyes as he noticed her tears. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "We can wait if you need more time." Catherine shook her head, smiling through her tears. "I'm fine, just touched by everyone's kindness." Relief washed over Kyle's features. He offered his arm, and as Catherine placed her hand upon it, she felt a surprising steadiness pass through her. Whatever uncertainties lay in their future in this moment, she was sure of her decision. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Reverend Wallace spoke eloquently of the sanctity of marriage, the commitment to stand by one another through life's joys and sorrows. When the time came to exchange vows, Catherine's voice remained steady as she promised to love, honor, and cherish Kyle Quinn for all her days. Kyle's voice, in contrast, caught slightly as he spoke his vows, his blue eyes never leaving Catherine's face. When he slid a simple gold band onto her finger, another surprise, she hadn't expected. His hands trembled just noticeably. "By the power vested in me by the state of Missouri and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Wallace declared with evident satisfaction. "Mr. Quinn, you may kiss your bride." A flush rose to Catherine's cheeks as Kyle turned to face her fully. They hadn't discussed this part of the ceremony, and she suddenly felt shy beneath the gazes of their small audience. But as Kyle's hands gently cradled her face, all thoughts of observers faded. His lips met hers in a kiss so tender, it made her heart ache. Not a perfunctory peck to seal their contract, but a genuine expression of affection and promise. When they parted, Catherine was startled to see emotion swimming in Kyle's eyes, quickly blinked away as the others surged forward with congratulations. "Oh, how lovely!" Mrs. Thornton exclaimed, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Simply lovely." "Congratulations, both of you," Mr. Thornton said, shaking Kyle's hand vigorously and bowing over Catherine's. "May your union be blessed with happiness and prosperity." After signing the marriage certificate and accepting the good wishes of the Wallaces, they stepped outside to find a small crowd had gathered. Word had spread quickly in the small town, and several people Catherine had never met called out congratulations as she and Kyle emerged from the church. "Word travels fast," Kyle murmured, looking somewhat abashed at the attention. "Is that the mail-order bride?" Catherine heard someone ask. "The one who nearly died on the trail. Appears she recovered just fine," another voice responded. "Lucky for Quinn. Pretty thing, isn't she?" Kyle's arm tightened protectively around Catherine's waist. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "Small-town curiosity." Catherine smiled up at him, surprisingly unbothered by the attention. "It's all right." "I imagine a mail-order bride collapsing from heatstroke makes for interesting gossip in a town this size." Kyle's expression relaxed into a smile. When you put it that way, I suppose we have given them something to talk about. Mr. and Mrs. Quinn, Mrs. Thornton called, hurrying after them. You must come for dinner tonight to celebrate properly. I've already started cooking. 6 o'clock sharp. Kyle looked to Catherine, clearly leaving the decision to her. That's very kind, Mrs. Thornton, Catherine said. We would be delighted, wouldn't we, Kyle? Delighted, Kyle agreed, though Catherine detected a hint of reluctance beneath his polite tone. As they made their way back to the buggy through the well-wishers, Catherine leaned closer to Kyle. We don't have to go if you'd rather not, she said quietly. I didn't mean to speak for both of us. No, it's fine, Kyle assured her. The Thorntons are good people. I'm just not used to socializing much. Been on my own too long, I suppose. The phrase echoed Ethan's words from the day before. Alone too long. As Kyle helped her into the buggy, his strong hand steady at her waist, Catherine wondered how long it had been since someone had truly cared for this man who had built a life for himself in this wild country. The ride back to the ranch, her home now, she reminded herself, was quieter than the journey to town. Kyle seemed lost in thought, and Catherine found herself sneaking glances at his profile, studying the man who was now her husband. The gold band on her finger caught the sunlight, still unfamiliar but not unwelcome. Catherine, Kyle said suddenly, breaking the silence. I want you to know that I don't expect. That is, I understand if you need time to become accustomed to married life. It took Catherine a moment to grasp his meaning, and when she did, a blush rose to her cheeks. Oh, she said softly, that's very considerate of you, Kyle. He kept his eyes on the road, a muscle working in his jaw. I meant what I said in my letters. I want a true partnership, not just a convenient arrangement. That means respecting your wishes, your comfort. Catherine was touched by his sensitivity. Many men in his position would have considered their rights as a husband paramount, especially with a mail-order bride. Kyle's consideration reinforced her growing conviction that she had been fortunate indeed to find this man. I appreciate that, she said. I do need a little time, I think. Everything has happened so quickly. Kyle nodded, relief evident in the relaxation of his shoulders. Take all the time you need. We have that luxury now. The rest of the journey passed in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the ranch, cresting the same hill where Kyle had first shown her the property, Catherine was struck by how different everything looked in just 2 days. What had been a strange, unfamiliar place was rapidly becoming home, and the man beside her was transforming from a name on letters to a husband she was beginning to genuinely care for. Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn, Kyle said softly as they pulled into the yard. The name sent a pleasant shiver through Catherine. Thank you, Mr. Quinn, she replied with a smile. As Kyle helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist slightly longer than necessary, Catherine felt a flutter of anticipation for the days ahead. Their beginning might have been unusual, a mail-order arrangement, a near tragedy on the trail, but somehow it felt right. She was home. The months that followed their hasty wedding unfolded in a rhythm that gradually became familiar to Catherine. Summer's brutal heat gave way to the crisp beauty of autumn, and with each passing day, she and Kyle learned more about each other, building a relationship that deepened from cautious respect to genuine affection. Catherine quickly took charge of the household, bringing feminine touches to the practical space Kyle had created. Curtains appeared at the windows, braided rugs softened the floors, and wildflowers in mason jars brightened the table. Kyle watched these transformations with quiet pleasure, sometimes running his fingers over a new cushion or curtain as if marveling at the change. For his part, Kyle proved to be a patient teacher, showing Catherine the workings of the ranch. She learned to collect eggs without disturbing the hens too greatly, to churn butter from the cream of their single milk cow, to tend the vegetable garden that supplied much of their food. Each new skill mastered brought a sense of accomplishment and belonging that had been missing in her Boston life. Their days fell into a comfortable pattern. Kyle rose before dawn, seeing to the livestock before returning for breakfast. Catherine would have coffee brewing and biscuits baking, the kitchen warm and fragrant as they shared the day's first meal. Then Kyle would head out again, sometimes with Ethan, sometimes alone, to tend to the endless work of the ranch, while Catherine managed the household. Evenings were Catherine's favorite time. After supper, they would often sit on the porch if the weather was fine, or by the fire if it was cool, talking about their day or sometimes simply enjoying a comfortable silence. Kyle, she discovered, was an avid reader, and they began taking turns reading aloud from the books on his shelf. True to his word, Kyle never pressed Catherine for the physical intimacy of marriage, though as weeks passed, small touches became more frequent between them, his hand at the small of her back as he passed behind her in the kitchen, her fingers brushing his when she handed him coffee, a lingering embrace before he left for a day's work. One crisp October evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and crimson, Kyle turned to her with an uncharacteristically hesitant expression. "I've been thinking," he began, his eyes serious in the fading light. "Winter will be here soon. The north bedroom gets the worst of the cold winds. The main bedroom, our bedroom, I suppose, is warmer." Catherine's heart quickened at his meaning. "Are you suggesting we should share the bedroom?" Kyle nodded slowly. "For practical reasons, if nothing else. But only if you're comfortable with the idea." Catherine studied his face in the twilight, noting the uncertainty in his eyes, the slight tension in his jaw. Over the past months, her feelings for Kyle had grown from gratitude and respect to something deeper, something that made her heart race when he smiled at her, that warmed her inside when their hands touched. "I think," she said carefully, "that a wife should share her husband's bed." Relief and something more intense washed over Kyle's features. "Catherine," he said, his voice rough, "I don't want you to feel obligated. Our arrangement has worked well as it is." "It's not obligation I'm feeling, Kyle," Catherine replied softly. When his questioning gaze met hers, she gathered her courage and continued. "These past months, living here with you, learning about the ranch, building this life together, I've come to care for you deeply, more than I expected when I answered your advertisement." Kyle's breath caught visibly. "Catherine," he whispered, reaching for her hand, his calloused fingers wrapped around hers, warm and strong. "I felt the same, but I wasn't sure. I didn't want to presume." "You've been very patient," Catherine acknowledged with a small smile. "More patient than many husbands would be." "I wanted you to be sure," Kyle said simply. "I wanted it to be real between us, not just duty or gratitude." Catherine's heart swelled at his words. Impulsively, she leaned forward, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened as Kyle's arms came around her, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both breathing faster, Kyle's eyes had darkened with emotion. "I've wanted to do that since our wedding day," he admitted, a hint of wonder in his voice. "Every day since, in fact." "Why didn't you?" Catherine asked, genuinely curious. Kyle's mouth quirked in a rueful smile. "Afraid, I suppose." "Afraid you might pull away, that you weren't ready, that you might never feel for me what I've come to feel for you." "And what is that, Kyle?" Catherine prompted softly, needing to hear the words. Kyle's eyes held her steadily. "Love, Catherine. I've fallen in love with you. Not just the idea of you from those letters, but you, the woman who brightens this house with flowers, who hums while she works, who isn't afraid to argue with me when I'm being stubborn. The woman who's made this place a true home." Tears filled Catherine's eyes at his declaration. "I love you too," she whispered, the truth of it filling her chest with warmth. "I think I started falling in love with you that day under the cottonwoods when you watched over me so carefully." Kyle pulled her close again, his kiss more urgent now, his hands tangling in her hair as pins fell unheeded to the porch floor. Catherine responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck, her body pressed against his solid warmth. "Perhaps," Kyle murmured against her lips when they paused for breath, "we should move this discussion inside." Catherine nodded, suddenly shy despite the heat coursing through her veins. Kyle stood, drawing her to her feet, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. Catherine laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck as he carried her through the doorway. "Is this necessary?" she asked, though she made no move to protest. Kyle's expression was a mixture of tenderness and desire that made her breath catch. "I carried you to safety once," he said softly. "Seems fitting to carry you to our bed the first time." That night, they truly became husband and wife in every sense, discovering each other with tender exploration and growing passion. Afterward, lying in Kyle's arms as moonlight spilled through the window, Catherine marveled at the twisting path that had led her to this moment. "What are you thinking?" Kyle asked, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best ones," she replied, tilting her face up to his. "If I hadn't collapsed on that trail, if you hadn't found me when you did." "I would still have found you," Kyle said with quiet certainty. "Maybe not that day in that way, but I believe we were meant to find each other, Catherine." As winter descended on the Missouri hills, bringing snow and icy winds, the Quinn household remained warm and bright. Kyle and Catherine settled into the rhythm of married life, with a contentment that deepened with each passing day. The single bedroom they now shared became a haven of intimacy and comfort, their initial shyness giving way to a physical relationship as fulfilling as their emotional one. Christmas brought Catherine's first experience of frontier hospitality, as neighbors from miles around gathered at various homesteads to celebrate. The Thorntons hosted the largest gathering, their spacious farmhouse filled with laughter, music, and more food than Catherine had seen since leaving Boston. "You've brought our Kyle back to the community," Martha Thornton confided as they worked side by side in the kitchen. "He was always respected, but he kept to himself too much. Now look at him laughing with James, helping with the children. That's your doing, my dear." Catherine followed Martha's gaze to where Kyle was demonstrating a rope trick to a circle of wide-eyed children, his usual seriousness replaced by playful enthusiasm. "He's changed me too," she admitted. "I never imagined I could be this happy, especially after nearly dying on that trail," Martha finished with characteristic directness. "Sometimes the Lord works in mysterious ways, Catherine. That awful day brought you and Kyle together in a way that might never have happened otherwise." As spring returned to the Missouri hills, bringing with it new growth and renewal, Catherine confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks: she was expecting a child. When she shared the news with Kyle one evening as they sat by the fire, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. "A baby," he repeated, his voice hushed with wonder. "You're sure?" Catherine nodded, her hands unconsciously cradling her still flat stomach. "The sickness in the mornings, the tiredness. I'm quite certain. The baby should arrive in late October if my calculations are correct." Kyle's face transformed with joy as he knelt before her chair, placing his hands gently over hers. "Catherine," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I never thought. That is, I hoped someday, but so soon. "Are you pleased?" she asked, though his expression left little doubt. In answer, Kyle gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious glass. "Please doesn't begin to describe it," he murmured against her hair. "I love you, Catherine Quinn. You've given me more happiness than I ever thought possible, and now this gift as well." The months of Catherine's pregnancy passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Kyle insisted on building a cradle himself, working late into the evening after his ranch duties were complete. He also began construction on an addition to the house, another bedroom for when their family grew further. "You're planning ahead," Catherine observed one evening as she watched him sand the cradle to silky smoothness. Kyle looked up with a smile that still had the power to make her heart skip. "I want our children to have room to grow, to play, to dream. Not just this one, but the others that might come after." "Children," Catherine echoed, loving the sound of it. "A family of our own." "We already are a family," Kyle said, setting aside his work to come kneel beside her chair, his hand resting on the swell of her belly where their child grew. "But yes, a larger one soon." On a crisp October day, almost exactly a year after Catherine had first told Kyle she loved him, their son was born after a long but ultimately uncomplicated labor. Martha Thornton served as midwife, her practical experience guiding Catherine through the ordeal while Kyle paced anxiously outside. "You have a fine boy, Kyle Quinn," Martha announced when she finally permitted him to enter. "Strong lungs on that one." Kyle approached the bed almost reverently, his eyes fixed on the small bundle in Catherine's arms. When she pulled back the blanket to reveal a red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair, his expression of awe brought tears to her eyes. "Meet your son," Catherine said softly. "Thomas Kyle Quinn." "Thomas," Kyle repeated, gently touching the baby's tiny fist. "After your father." Catherine nodded, touched that he had remembered that detail from her letters so long ago. "I thought you wouldn't mind." "It's perfect," Kyle assured her, his voice rough with emotion. "He's perfect. You're perfect, Catherine." As Kyle carefully took his son into his arms for the first time, Catherine watched her husband's face, this man who had once advertised for a practical marriage arrangement, who had carried her unconscious from a dusty trail and watched over her until she woke, who had given her time to fall in love naturally, who now looked at their child with unbridled adoration. "I never expected this," she said softly. "When I left Boston, I hoped for security, for a decent life. I never dreamed I would find such happiness." Kyle looked from his son to his wife, his blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "Nor did I," he admitted. "I thought I was being practical, sending for a mail-order bride. Instead, I found the love of my life." 5 years later, the Quinn Ranch had prospered along with its inhabitants. The house had expanded to accommodate not only Thomas, but also his 2-year-old sister, Elizabeth. The cattle herd had doubled in size, requiring Kyle to hire additional help beyond faithful Ethan, who now managed much of the daily operation while Kyle focused on expansion. Catherine, too, had grown into her role not just as wife and mother, but as a respected member of the community. She had started a small lending library in one corner of the general store, sharing her love of books with neighbors who had limited access to reading material. She also taught basic reading and writing to several local children whose families couldn't afford to send them to the school in town. On the anniversary of the day Kyle had found her collapsed on the trail, they made it a tradition to ride together to the copse of cottonwoods where he had carried her to safety. This year, they brought a picnic basket and their children, Thomas running ahead to explore while Elizabeth rode securely in front of her father on his horse. "It looks different through happy eyes," Catherine observed as they spread a blanket beneath the trees. That day, I was barely conscious, but I remember thinking the shade was heaven after the brutal sun. Kyle settled beside her, watching Thomas chase butterflies through the tall grass. I was terrified you wouldn't wake up, he admitted, not for the first time. I kept talking to you, hoping you'd hear me and come back. I did hear you, Catherine said, leaning against his shoulder. Not your words exactly, but your voice. It was like a lifeline pulling me back. Kyle's arm came around her, drawing her closer. I think I started falling in love with you that day, though I didn't recognize it then. Even though I was a disaster, Catherine teased. Sunburned, unconscious, completely helpless, especially then, Kyle replied seriously. You were so vulnerable, yet so strong even in your weakness. I admired your determination, even if it was misplaced. Catherine smiled, watching as Elizabeth toddled over to join her brother's butterfly chase. I suppose we should thank the Missouri summer heat for bringing us together. I'd rather thank you, Kyle said, turning to face her fully. For answering my advertisement, for taking a chance on a stranger, for building this life with me. Catherine met his gaze, seeing in his blue eyes the same love that had sustained them through 5 years of marriage, through joys and hardships, through the birth of their children, through the daily work of creating a home together. I'd do it all again, she said softly. Even the heat stroke. Kyle laughed, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that held all the passion of newlyweds and the deeper connection of partners who had weathered life's challenges together. Let's hope that part isn't necessary next time. Next time, Catherine raised an eyebrow. Kyle's smile turned mischievous. Well, if Martha Thornton's hints are any indication, the community expects at least 2 more Quinn children to balance things out. Does it now? Catherine replied with a laugh. And what does Mr. Quinn think about that prospect? Kyle's expression softened as he gazed at their children playing beneath the cottonwoods. Mr. Quinn thinks he's already the luckiest man in Missouri, he said, but he wouldn't object to more blessings. As the afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the blanket where they sat, Catherine leaned against her husband's solid strength, contentment filling her heart. From a desperate decision made in a Boston boarding house to this moment of perfect happiness, her journey had been unpredictable and at times frightening. But as Kyle's arm tightened around her waist and their children's laughter filled the air, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home, not in a place, but in the heart of the man who had carried her to safety and stayed until she woke, and every day since.